when cultural accommodation became a national question in Australia. Recognition question. Have you ever felt that your country was changing faster than anyone was willing to explain? Not a sudden change, a gradual one, a feeling that someone important had shifted, something important had moved around you. But every attempt to describe it was met with silence, dismissal, or accusation. New customs, new sensitivities, new public conversation, new rules around that. The school newsletter, new rules around that. The workplace chaining changes. The council policy changes. The media language changes. Yet the official message remains remarkably consistent. Nothing significant apparently is happening. And you think something is happening. And if you think something is happening, perhaps the problem is you. For many Australians, that contradiction has become impossible to ignore. This series does not begin with Islam, it begins with governance. Because every civilization eventually faces the same question. How much accommodation can a society absorb before accommodation itself becomes a governing force? And that question becomes more important when governments stop discussing integration and begin discussing management. When social cohesion becomes secondary to conflict avoidance, when difficult questions become professional risks, when public debate becomes increasingly controlled by fear of social consequences, the issue is not ordinary Muslims living peacefully under Australia law. Millions of people around the world practice their faith while respecting the civil authority and nation they live within. The issue is whether Australian institutions have honestly examined the long-term consequences of policies they have promoted for decades. A democracy can protect religious freedoms. A democracy should protect religious freedoms. But a democracy cannot surrender the supremacy of its civil law. It cannot allow competing authorities to quietly acquire influence while public scrutiny is treated as hostility. And that's where accommodation stops being a cultural question and becomes a constitutional question. This series will examine immigration, multiculturalism, institutional behaviour, free speech, social cohesion, women's rights, religious accommodation, and the rule of law. Now, it's not going to be through slogans, not through fear, but through evidence, governance, and consequence. Because the most important question facing Australians and Australia may not be who is arriving. It may be whether Australian institutions still possess the courage to honestly discuss what arrival means. And if these institutions cannot or will not, then the question has already moved beyond politics. It has entered the structure of the nation. I'll see you in the next episode when settlement replaced integration.